Welcome, friends. And so many of you are more than friends. You are family, but you have been in this together. I would like to introduce you to Bruce Vandal. He's the Vice President of Complete College America, and he's here to give us a national perspective on developmental education reform movements, where we are and where we need to think about going. But more than think about it, it's things we need to do together. So thank you, and I look forward to the rest of our day together.
Good morning, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here with you today. Is there an election coming up? I just couldn't tell by watching television last night, but very interesting race. It was a lot of fun watching those ads last night. Coming from Colorado, they're very different ads in Kentucky than they are in Colorado. Very interesting. But it really is a pleasure to be here in Kentucky for actually a lot of reasons. There is no question, and Dr. Thompson referenced it, those of us who watch the scene around college completion, around college readiness, around the efforts in K-12 and higher education, look to Kentucky because of the work that you have accomplished in this state. You have done some tremendous things, and even more exciting is not just what you've done, but the results that you've accomplished, right? I mean, the data is coming out. I know just last week Sue released the new data, shared that with us in terms of what's happening in K-12 in terms of increasing college readiness. And so Kentucky is a mover and a shaker. There is no question about that. So we are thrilled at Complete College America to know that you are taking on this issue of remedial education and as part of that spirit and the capacity that you all have to actually make things happen in your state. So we're very excited to be with you here today to talk a bit about some of the issues that we're focused on. I'm going to try to grab our PowerPoint here, right? Let's see. There it is. So for those of you who are not familiar with Complete College America, we were started in 2009. We are a national nonprofit organization that has one simple and clear objective, which is to dramatically increase college completion rates across the country. We were started at a time when President Obama and many leaders across the country made it very clear that in order for our country to be competitive in the economy, we need to find a way to dramatically increase the percentage of our residents who have college degrees. And so we were created with that specific purpose. And now we started off with about 17 or so states and have expanded ourselves to about 35 states across the country, including Kentucky, that are focused on strategies related to college completion. We have what we call 5 game-changer strategies that we focus on, the first of which is called co-requisite remediation, and I'm going to tell you a little bit more about that in a few minutes. We also do 15 to finish, that's focused on how do we dramatically increase the credit intensity that students are enrolled in, because we know through strategies like in Hawaii and in other states that getting students to take 15 credits not only reduces their time and credits to degree, but also increases graduation rates and doesn't compromise the quality of their education more than anything. Academically, students do just fine when they take 15 credits in more cases than not. We also do a lot of work around what we call guided pathways, which is how do we provide students a clear map on day one on how they can, semester by semester, with support, get through their academic program, removing a lot of the confusion and overwhelming information that students are thrust upon them when they start on campus, and instead try to provide information in a way that's going to help them make better choices that are going to ultimately lead to college completion. And we're working in a number of states, what we call guided pathways to success. Structured schedules is another strategy that we focus on, which is how do we reorganize when students are in class? Should we be having students enroll in their courses at a time convenient to them rather than maybe convenient to others on campus? A morning block, an afternoon block, an evening or weekend block where students don't have to worry about trying to juggle their schedules, but finding a very specific time when they can focus on their studies and then go about their lives with their families and their jobs, etc. And those are all strategies that we have focused on that have evidence that institutions have employed, have done so at scale, and seen tremendous impacts in terms of college completion. And we're not talking about 2 or 3% increases in college completion, but double-digit improvements. And in some cases, 2 to 3 times the success rates of students under normal strategies. And so the point of this is we're focused at Complete College America on high-impact strategies that are scalable, that can dramatically increase college completion. And so the one I want to talk to you about today is co-requisite remediation. For those of you who are involved in developmental education, probably know that over the last 10 years or so, we have gone through really an amazing sort of renaissance in terms of understanding what's happening in the world of developmental education, what's happening in classrooms, but more importantly, what's happening systemically on college campuses in terms of how we are assessing students, how we're placing students, and what happens to them and why they are or are not successful. And so as a result of that, we've begun to see some amazing innovation in the field. We have a better sense today than ever before on how to actually effectively prepare students for post-secondary level work and actually see them be successful in college-level gateway courses. And at the end of the day, what we're talking about is a dramatic systemic change, really, in how we support students who come to our campuses. Instead of saying to students, here you are, you're not quite ready for college, we need to have you go over here in this area and focus on your basic skills, and then come talk to us when it's time to start your program in earnest, to a situation where we're seeing strategies that are embracing students as they walk on campus and immediately engaging them in college-level work and providing them the academic support when they need it as they pursue their academic studies. And we think that's critically important to understand for students in terms of mindset, but also in terms of how we design instruction and provide support to students. And so what I want to do for you for the next few minutes is sort of make the case, kind of give you the data and the research about why this is the case and what are some of the strategies that we're seeing in the field that are having really dramatic impacts for students. Let's start here. Of course, we all know, and Kentucky is all too aware because of the work that you've done across your system, of the high percentage of students who are walking on our college campuses who are assessed and then placed into remedial education. This is data that we've collected from our states that show, and this is, I think, a very conservative estimate, actually, about 50% of 2-year students and about 20% of 4-year students. You will often find on community college campuses, maybe on your campus, that the rates are even higher than that, 60, 70, 80. We've encountered campuses that it's as high as 90% of students who are enrolling in community colleges requiring at least one remedial education course. So we're not talking about a strategy that's for a small number of students. We're talking about a systemic effort that's going to meet the needs of the vast majority of students on your college campuses. But here's what we know and have talked about for many, many years is when we've thought about remedial education, we've looked at this top column or this top row here, which is, are students passing or completing their remedial education? And in many cases, actually they are. It's not a problem of whether or not students who enroll in a remedial education course actually complete that course. In many cases across your campus, you're probably finding, if you are an instructor, that many of your students are passing that individual course that you are teaching. But the problem comes in down the road as students progress into their next remedial course and ultimately towards their gateway college courses. And we find that very few students, as low as 20% of students at community colleges ever actually enroll in and complete the remediation. And then in terms of passing gateway courses, even a lower percentage than that. And then obviously, if you extend that all the way through to graduation, we're finding that very, very few students who are placed into remedial education ever earn a post-secondary credential within, in this case, at a community college within 6 years. So, over 300% time. So the point is that those students who are placed into remedial education in the current models that we have of prerequisite instruction rarely ever earn a post-secondary credential. And what is the reason for this? And I think this is where the research has been the most illustrative. is the fact that it's not necessarily, like I said, what's happening in individual classrooms. It's that the long sequences of remedial courses that we offer students or require students to go through, in some cases 2, 3, 4, maybe even more semesters of remedial math or English, result in students dropping out of the system. So a student may pass their first or even their second remedial course, but when they have to come to that next course or the gateway course, they simply have life get in the way at some point, and they fall out of the system. And it's really then so then the point is that it's really attrition. It's a systemic problem of how we've designed remedial support, not necessarily the instruction itself that's dictating what happens to these students. And so this is a good illustration of that in math, where you'll see that if you start with 10 students that are all placed in remedial education, we'll see about half of them are lost right away. Some of them will just turn around and leave the institution altogether. Some may pass the course, but then not enroll in the subsequent course. Some may fail the course. But the bottom line is that by and large, the vast majority of students that we're losing are not losing because they fail necessarily, but because they just drop out of the system. They don't enroll in the subsequent course that they're supposed to be in, to the point where in mathematics, if you start 3 levels below, in mathematics, you end up having about a 1 in 10 chance of actually ever getting through your gateway math course, which you were being remediated for. It's not quite as severe in English, but still, nevertheless, we're losing a very high percentage of students simply because they fall out of the system. Don't enroll in the necessary next course that's going to get them where they need to be. So what that means is that we end up having about 70% of students that really don't even ever enroll in or complete the gateway course within 2 academic years, according to our data. So this problem of student attrition is really pretty profound. And so what are we sort of focused on then? If that is the case, that if we're losing students all along the way, what is really our clear objective that we need to be focused on? And we need to shift away from our thinking that is success is measured on whether or not students complete an individual remedial course, or even if they complete the remedial sequence of courses, but whether or not they pass the gateway college level course. And we believe that the critical metric, and that is because all of the data tell us that if we can get students through gateway courses within their first academic year and get them into a program of study by the end of their first academic year, their chances of graduation go up immeasurably. And so we've set as a metric for the institutions and the states that we're working with to really shoot for getting as many students as you can through gateway courses within the first academic year. In fact, we had about 22 states sign on to that pledge at the beginning of this year at a White House summit on college completion, because they all understand that if they're going to crack this nut that is remedial education, they have to find a way to set a metric that's really focused and linked to college completion. And so we are working with states right now on how they can achieve this very important objective. And we also know that we need to operate at scale, and that's why we're excited to be with you here today and to know that we've got the Council on Post-Secondary Education providing leadership to engage all of your campuses and how we can develop a strategy that's not going to impact just an isolated group of students on a handful of campuses, but actually is going to result in the vast majority of students at the vast majority of institutions being impacted by what we call co-requisite support. And so doing so is the only way you can dramatically increase college success rates. And Kentucky, of all states, know that working at scale, working across institutions, working across K-12 and higher ed, that is the only way to get the kind of improvements that you're beginning to see there. This isn't done piecemeal, this isn't done in isolation, but it has to somehow be done at scale within your institution and across institutions. So what I want to talk to you about over the next few minutes is just give you some of the basics about what we think are the key strategies into a co-requisite model that you can be developing on your college campuses. And then we'll be able to get into a little bit more detail with some wonderful examples as part of our panel here in a few minutes. The first thing I want to talk about, and this is particularly focused on mathematics, is that we're learning more and more that we need to create alternative pathways for students in mathematics. On too many college campuses, the default pathway is to prepare students for college algebra, but we know that many, many students do not need college algebra for their program of study, and that we need to find a way to change and shift our thinking to prepare students for the mathematics that they really need in order to be successful in their program of study. The second is that we should be looking and changing our mindset around what happens to students when they come on college campus. Instead of if we have a question mark about whether or not a student is college ready, putting them into remediation, really the default placement for the majority of students needs to be in a college level course with or without some kind of academic support. And then, of course, then that means, number three, that really we should be providing much more support for students in college-level courses as a co-requisite, rather than asking them to jump through a hoop, meeting a specific standard before they actually are granted access to those college courses. Because we know, like I said, from the research, when you do it that way, you're likely never going to get them there. They're never going to find their way to the gateway course. So we have to find a way to wrap our arms around them and support them as best as we can for as many students as we can in the college-level course. And then I'll talk a little bit about placement at the end of the day, really focused on how it is that we use assessment and placement to support students in college-level coursework as opposed to filtering them in or out of college-level coursework. So let's start really briefly talking about mathematics and how it can be aligned to programs of study. On many college campuses, the way that we've designed our remedial education instruction is a set of prerequisite courses that are to lead students to college algebra, and then presumably students would then enroll in college algebra as their math requirement. But we are seeing from research, and this is something that's been a statement by math faculty from MAA, from the community college math faculty organizations, as well as other math faculty around the world that are saying that, you know what, college algebra really at the end of the day is not intended for any other purpose than to prepare students for pre-calculus and calculus. So if your program of study does not require some form of calculus, then it's probably not necessary for students to be in college algebra, and instead they should be in some kind of other experience that would be maybe appropriate to their program of study. So it may look like, for a statistics pathway, it might be for social science students, political science, psychology, etc. A quantitative reasoning pathway maybe makes sense for students in liberal arts programs that are not statistically based. And then, of course, a STEM pathway for students who are indeed preparing for an engineering program or a program that requires calculus. And in fact, we find that this isn't a new concept, and there are many institutions in many states that have this somewhat in place, but still there's this overarching assumption for many students that they need to get through college algebra, or they're advised into college algebra because, quote unquote, you should keep all of your options open. When in fact the reality is that students, when they have choices and when they have a clear sense of what they want to do, in fact college algebra probably isn't the best choice, and unfortunately it creates a stumbling block for many students. Students never find their way through college algebra. So why are we designing our remedial system so that students should be preparing for college algebra when in fact they really probably don't need it? And so we're working with organizations like the Dana Center to work with campuses, but also with states on how they can create better pathways, articulated pathways, beginning in community college that would prepare students for statistics, for quantitative reasoning, or for college algebra, depending on their program of study, and then moving students through those courses and ultimately articulating those courses with programs of study, because one of the issues is, of course, convincing academic programs that indeed if you don't have calculus as a requirement, you probably shouldn't have college algebra as your math requirement. So that is sort of component one of what we're working on as it relates to remedial education reform. The second, and at the heart of the matter in terms of what we're doing, is focusing on what we call co-requisite academic support. So when we talk about, and sort of simply defined, what we talk about in terms of co-requisite is instead of having students learn academic material, sort of pre-college level material in isolation in a prerequisite course that's devoid or disconnected from what they're going to be learning in the gateway course, we should be integrating instruction and academic support as much as we can for as many students as we can while they're enrolled in the college level gateway course. So this is sort of a systemic change. It's about getting rid of the prerequisite support and integrating and supporting students while they're enrolled in college-level courses. There's not any one single model for how to do this. This isn't saying singularly putting everybody into a gateway course and doing one thing to support them. But there are many different strategies, and so I want to take a couple of minutes to talk to you about a couple of examples, and of course you'll hear more about different strategies here in a moment on the panel and then this afternoon. The first, of course, would be a one-semester redesigned gateway course, which is essentially, at the end of the day, enrolling students into a college-level math or English course, and then providing them extra support and extra time. It might be an additional 45 minutes after class. It might be mandatory tutoring or a laboratory setting, like what's happening at Austin Peay State University. It could even be sequenced, where you accelerate students through the first part of the semester through remedial support, and then accelerate them through the gateway material by maybe having them go to class 5 days a week rather than 3 days a week. But the bottom line is focused on, within one semester, providing students the support they need to get through the gateway course in that first semester. That's one model, and you'll hear about an example of that later today, a couple different examples of that later on today that are able to achieve that. And here's just a reason why this model, we think, is pretty exciting. Some of you may have heard of the Accelerated Learning Project model out of Community College of Baltimore County, where they've been able to take their students who have been placed into prerequisite English into the gateway course and then offer the remedial course at the same time or in the same semester. So students are getting the academic support they need while enrolled in the gateway course. And they were able to increase their success rates in gateway courses from about 33% to almost 75%. Likewise, and you're going to hear more about this morning, is Austin Peay State University, which has created a single semester co-requisite strategy for all English and mathematics students. Everybody on their college campus who's admitted is taking this approach, and they've been able to see amazing results, particularly in mathematics, where students who were originally placed 2 levels below in mathematics and success rates were hovering around 10% to the point where their success rates are in the 60 to 70 to almost 80% level, because they've been able to push students into the gateway course and provide them intensive support in that gateway course while still providing the academic support they need in basic skills. And so there's reason to believe that this approach has a lot of currency. In fact, there was recent research done out of the City University of New York where they actually implemented this model and compared it, doing an experimental design where they were actually putting students into the prerequisite course of remediation and then in the gateway course, and then providing the exact same level of support to those students. So we'll put you in this an elementary or an algebra course that's a prerequisite for the statistics course, and then we're going to put some students in the statistics course. They sampled size, so they were basically the same group of students, and they delivered the instruction and they delivered the same level of support, and they found that those students who were in the gateway course and received the high level of support actually performed better than the students who received the same level of support in the prerequisite remedial algebra course. And so the point is there's some sort of a secret sauce when you're giving students additional academic support and they're doing it in a college-level course. And that is indeed what the research is telling us, is that there's something psychologically as well as structurally that seems to work when it comes to providing support for students when they're in college courses, rather than doing so as a prerequisite. The second strategy that we are focused on is what we would call a one-year co-requisite, keeping in mind that we're talking about getting students through the gateway course within one academic year. So we're not saying it has to be done in one semester. If our metric is 1 year, there are ways that we can reach students, maybe students who have skills levels that are a little lower, but we need to provide more time on task, and we can do it within 2 semesters. So some of you, in mathematics in particular, have heard of the Quantway Statway program at the Dana Center in Texas. There's the new Math Pathways program. In California, there's the California Acceleration Model, or the California Acceleration Project that is actually using this approach, where essentially what they're doing is over 2 semesters, they are beginning to engage students in college-level coursework, but providing that academic support that they need and basic skills and supporting them all the way throughout that academic year. So by the end of the year, they're completing their college-level courses. With the California Acceleration Project, they just had a study done, and they showed that, in fact, this is working most effectively for students who are assessed at the very lowest levels. In fact, they're seeing success rates that are, believe it or not, 8 times greater for students who are in this model as opposed to their old model, which was 3 or 4 semesters of remedial education before they had access to the gateway course. So accelerating the student's experience, integrating instruction while they're gateway content with the support is having dramatic effects in terms of improving student success. And so here is just one example of the Carnegie Statway model and what they were able to see in terms of results across the multiple campuses that implemented this. Campuses that were getting about 6% of students through gateway courses in mathematics, we're seeing over 50% of students getting through gateway mathematics using this approach. The last model, very briefly, is for technical programs. Instead of having students take prerequisite math or English courses before they get into their technical program, is to provide that support alongside their technical course program. So it's not a prerequisite, but it's a program requirement. So it's competency-based often. So we see at the Tennessee Centers for Colleges of Applied Technology, they've employed this approach where students, while they're in their technical programs, are receiving the academic support at the same time. And what they're seeing is, as a result of that, they're seeing graduation rates that have gone up tremendously. About 80% of their students graduate having met all of their math and English requirements by having their academic support taught alongside their technical career and technical education courses. So there's many, many different ways to go at this challenge, and we're really encouraging institutions to innovate. And I think that's really the most important thing. As you think about what you might want to do on your college campuses, these models can be replicated, there's no question about this. But when we think about innovating in our classrooms, we want you to think about it in terms of not how do we redesign a prerequisite sequence, but how are we providing students more support in college-level courses, whatever that might look like. And using that as the space where we focus on innovation. The last thing I want to talk about really briefly, and then we'll get the panel started, is this whole notion of assessment and placement. And we know, and we've gotten stuck into this sort of quagmire ourselves at CCA, where if we could just design a better test and get a better handle on which students are or are not ready, that would be a big win for us, right? But unfortunately, what we're finding is that using any number of different measures, there is really no good predictor out there that can tell us with confidence and in any definitive way which students are or are not ready for college-level work. And so if you look at the research, we found that using, say, a single placement exam and a cut score, that their error rate can be upwards of 50%. In other words, about 50% of students who are placed into remedial education using an assessment like Compass or Accuplacer could actually be successful in college-level courses if given the opportunity. And so, indeed, we find that relying on assessment and placement as a solution is really not going to get us there. Instead, we have to think about redesigning the system. And if you look at this graph, you can see, the way that we think about this generally is either you're in or you're out. And I think everybody knows that students fall on a continuum. There is no definitive point where you can say that a student is or is not college ready because there's so many other factors that play into this. And sure, you can throw in things like high school GPA and the rest, and those are helpful, but they're still not going to get me the right answer. So instead of creating a definitive line, particularly when we know that the data shows that those who are in the red section, their outcomes, their likelihood of graduation, their likelihood of getting through the gateway courses is so much lower, we shouldn't really be sentencing students to that experience if we know we can support them in the college-level course. And so we propose something much more along the lines of a range, right? There are definitely students that are ready for gateway courses. There's no reason to change your standards for that. Those who you are placing into gateway courses today, you should place them into gateway courses tomorrow. But we think that there's a significant percentage of students, because there's no definitive way to draw a fine line, that we can place them into gateway courses and provide a range of support for them, whether that's a single semester option or a 2-semester option. But the bottom line is, we think, and we've seen over and over again, that we can really effectively serve a high percentage of students in a co-requisite model for many, many. Maybe not everybody, but for a very high percentage of students. And so we should design our assessment and placement system not in terms of who's in and out of gateway courses, but for the purpose of determining the type of support those students need in the gateway course, whether that's a single semester or a 2-semester, what have you. So the point is rethinking how we see assessment and placement, not in terms of sorting, but in terms of supporting students in college-level courses. So that's essentially sort of the 4 key things that we would like to have you talk about, ask questions about, and discuss over the course of the day today. And we think doing so, and we've seen many, many states do this, that are moving to scale using these strategies. So states like Indiana, West Virginia, Colorado, all have set state-level policy or have made a commitment across their institutions to scale these approaches because they recognize that if they're going to see dramatic improvements in student success, they have to do this, but they have to do it at scale. And so we are excited to know that there are many other states that are considering this, including Kentucky. And I will sort of leave you with one final statement about why I think Kentucky is an exciting place, is at a very exciting place. You have been, of course, a leader in the country in terms of preparing students for higher education by reforming what you're doing in K-12 education, and you're beginning to see results. And so as a result of that, you're going to have fewer students than ever that are going to require remedial education. If you were to combine all of those efforts that you've made on K-12 with a co-requisite strategy in higher education, you really have something that we could have probably never said with confidence even 5 years ago. You could have a situation where in Kentucky, really the vast majority of your new entering students should be placed directly into college-level courses, either in a gateway course on its own or in a gateway course with support, which means essentially you should be able to drop your standalone remedial education rates to, if not zero, very low percentages because of the effort that you've made in K-12 and also the opportunity that you have in higher education. So I just want to say that I think this is the only state I could probably say with confidence that if you were to implement these strategies, that you would see amazing reductions in the percentage of students who are in standalone remediation if you were to implement these strategies across all of your campuses. So I'll sort of leave that as a parting thought, and it's something for you to think about because I do think there's great potential here in Kentucky.